Dad's voice came through at exactly 3:30 p.m., bright and cheerful the way it always sounded when he was trying to make Cheryl happy. "Hey, sweetheart, just wanted to let you know I grabbed that pretty green necklace from your jewelry box for Cheryl to wear tonight. You know, the emerald one that looks like those fancy costume pieces from Nordstrom. She's wearing that gorgeous black dress to the Morrison Gala, and she said the color would be perfect." I stared at my phone, my blood turning to ice as I processed what my father had just told me. The emerald necklace. The one sitting in my bedroom jewelry box since last night's collector dinner. The one I'd carelessly left out instead of putting in the safe like Mom always taught me. The one worth $2.3 million that Dad thought was cheap costume jewelry, and he'd just given it to his wife of 3 years to wear in front of 300 of Los Angeles' most prominent attorneys. My fingers went numb around the phone as my brain struggled to process what he'd just said. Pretty green necklace. Costume jewelry. From my jewelry box. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Which necklace exactly, Dad? The emerald one with all the sparkly stuff around it." "Don't worry, honey. I'll make sure she takes good care of it. You know how Cheryl is about beautiful things. She has such an eye for quality." I did know how Cheryl was about beautiful things. Tyler's wife of 3 years had an expensive taste and a habit of borrowing items that somehow never made their way back to their original owners. But this was different. This was catastrophically different. "I'll call you back, Dad. I need to check on something." Before he could respond, I hung up and ran from my office to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. The drive to my house in the Pasadena Hills usually took 15 minutes, but I made it in 8, taking corners faster than my mother's old BMW was designed for. I burst through the front door and straight up to my bedroom where my jewelry box sat on the antique vanity table that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Most of my everyday pieces were scattered across the velvet compartments. Pearl earrings from Mom, the vintage gold bracelet Grandma Eleanor had given me for my college graduation, simple chains and rings I wore to work. But the deep blue velvet compartment in the back corner was empty, the compartment where I had placed the Whitmore family emerald necklace just 18 hours earlier. My mind flashed back to Friday night. The private collector's dinner party in Beverly Hills had run later than expected, ending close to 11 p.m. I'd worn the necklace to establish credibility with potential clients to show that Matthew's Gallery had access to museum-quality pieces. The evening had been successful with 3 serious inquiries about upcoming acquisitions. But I'd come home exhausted, my feet aching from standing in heels for 5 hours, my head buzzing with champagne and business possibilities. I kicked off my shoes, unclasped my jewelry at the vanity table, and dropped everything into the nearest compartments without thinking. The necklace should have gone immediately into the safe downstairs in my home office. That was the family rule drilled into me by my mother from the time I was old enough to understand what precious meant. Never leave the heirlooms out even for one night. Always secure them properly. But I'd been tired, focused on Monday's museum presentation, and I'd broken the most fundamental rule of our family's legacy. I'd planned to move it to the safe first thing Saturday morning, but I'd left for the gallery early to prepare for the museum meeting. Dad had his spare key for emergencies, and he'd stopped by around noon to pick up some tax documents from my home office that he needed for his own filing. He must have seen the jewelry box sitting open on my vanity table and assumed everything in it was everyday costume jewelry. After all, what would his art gallery daughter be doing with anything truly valuable? The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Dad back. The phone went straight to voicemail. He'd probably already arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel and switched to Do Not Disturb mode for the gala. I tried again. Voicemail. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, weak but determined during those final months of her battle with cancer. "Promise me this stays in the family, Victoria. Not because of the money, but because it represents every strong woman who came before you. It's been passed down for 5 generations, and each woman who wore it understood that she was a guardian, not an owner." I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to think clearly. The Morrison and Associates Gala started at 6:30. It was now 4:15. I had roughly 2 hours to get to Beverly Hills and somehow convinced Dad to make Cheryl remove a $2.3 million antique emerald necklace without causing a scene that would destroy his reputation at his law firm. $2.3 million. The number had been burned into my memory since the last insurance appraisal. Marcus Chen, one of the most respected jewelry appraisers in Southern California, had spent 3 hours documenting every facet, every detail of craftsmanship, every element of its provenance. And my stepmother was about to wear it to a charity gala, thinking it was a department store knockoff. I grabbed my purse and headed back to my car, praying I could reach Dad before this family heirloom became the center of a very public disaster. As I drove toward Beverly Hills, my mind kept drifting back to that afternoon 18 months ago when I'd sat across from Marcus Chen in his appraisal office. It had been one of those brutally hot August days when the San Gabriel Mountains disappeared behind a haze of smog and heat, but Marcus's office stayed cool and professional, filled with specialized lighting equipment and magnification tools. I'd brought the necklace in a plain black jewelry box, the same one my mother had used, and the same one her mother had used before that. Marcus was Maggie's older brother, and I'd known him since college, but I'd never seen him work before. The transformation was remarkable. The casual, joking guy who used to tease his little sister became completely focused, handling the necklace with the reverence of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. "This is extraordinary, Victoria." He'd adjusted his jeweler's loop and leaned closer to examine the central stone. "Colombian emeralds this size and clarity from the 1870s are museum-quality pieces. Look at this setting work. This is master European craftsmanship, probably done in San Francisco during the gold rush boom." He'd photographed every angle, measured every dimension, and carefully examined the documentation I'd brought with me. 5 generations of paperwork. The original purchase receipt from Heinrich and Brothers Fine Jewelers in San Francisco, dated October 15, 1870. Insurance records from my great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, who'd had it appraised in 1902, 1923, and 1941. My great-grandmother's documentation from the 1960s. My grandmother's from the 1980s. My mother's from 2010. Each woman had been meticulous about maintaining the chain of ownership, understanding that provenance was almost as valuable as the piece itself. Marcus had shown me details I'd never noticed, even though I'd grown up seeing the necklace at family gatherings. The way the emerald was cut in the old European style, maximizing fire over brilliance. The delicate mill-grain work around each diamond accent. The hidden inscription inside the clasp that read, "For my beloved Eleanor, may this bring you the strength of generations." Current replacement value, Marcus had said, writing carefully in his assessment report, $2.3 million. But honestly, the cultural and historical significance makes it effectively priceless. There are maybe 3 comparable pieces still in existence from the California Gold Rush era. Most were broken up and reset over the decades, or lost to family disputes and divorces. I'd felt the weight of that responsibility sitting in his office, understanding for the first time what my mother had tried to explain during her final months. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a tangible connection to women I'd never met, but whose strength lived on in family stories passed down through generations. My great-great-grandmother Eleanor had been 19 when she arrived in San Francisco with her new husband in 1870. She'd worked as a seamstress while he tried his luck in the silver mines of Nevada. When he struck a small claim, the first thing he'd bought her wasn't a bigger house or finer clothes. It was that necklace because he wanted her to have something beautiful that would last forever. She'd worn it to her children's weddings, to important business meetings when she took over the mining interests after her husband's death, and to suffrage rallies in the 1890s. She'd passed it to her daughter with the understanding that it represented independence and strength, not just wealth. My great-grandmother had worn it through the Depression, refusing to sell it even when the family lost almost everything else. My grandmother had worn it to her college graduation in 1952, one of only 12 women in her engineering class at UCLA. My mother had worn it to her wedding, to my birth announcement party, and to every major milestone in her career as an art historian. And I'd left it sitting on my vanity table like a trinket from a mall jewelry store. The memory of my mother's final conversation about the necklace was crystal clear. We'd been sitting in her hospital room during one of her better days when the pain medication wasn't making her too drowsy to think clearly. She'd insisted on going through all the family documents, making sure I understood the responsibility I was inheriting. This isn't about money, sweetheart. She'd held the necklace up to catch the afternoon light streaming through the hospital window. This is about remembering that you come from strong women, women who built something from nothing, who survived when survival seemed impossible, who passed down their strength so you could stand on their shoulders. Promise me you'll protect it, Victoria. Not just the necklace itself, but what it represents. There will be people who see dollar signs instead of history, who think expensive means the same thing as valuable. Don't let anyone convince you that family legacy is something you can replace or replicate. I'd promised, of course. But sitting in that hospital room watching my mother fade away day by day, I'd never imagined the threat would come from within my own family. Now driving through the late afternoon traffic toward Beverly Hills, I realized I was about to face the exact scenario my mother had warned me about. Someone who saw dollar signs instead of history. Someone who thought expensive meant the same thing as valuable. The difference was, I'd never expected that someone to be my own father. The Beverly Hills Hotel's grand ballroom was exactly what I'd expected. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 300 of Los Angeles's legal elite, their wives draped in designer gowns, and enough jewelry to fund a small country's national budget. The Morrison and Associates annual charity gala was always the event of the season for corporate lawyers, the kind of gathering where partnerships were discussed over champagne and million-dollar donations were pledged with casual smiles. I spotted Cheryl immediately. She was impossible to miss standing near the silent auction display in a black Valentino gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But it wasn't the dress that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the way the emerald necklace caught the light, the 1870s craftsmanship, absolutely stunning against the modern cut of her dress. She was surrounded by the wives of Dad's law partners, clearly holding court and loving every second of the attention. I could hear her voice carrying over the classical quartet as I approached, bright and animated in that way that meant she was performing for an audience. This piece has such incredible history. Cheryl touched the necklace delicately, the gesture of someone who knew she was wearing something special. It belonged to my great-grandmother, one of the original California settlers. Tyler's family has such beautiful heritage, and I feel so honored to be part of carrying on these traditions. My stomach clenched. She wasn't just wearing my family's most precious heirloom. She was lying about its history, claiming it as her own legacy, rewriting 5 generations of strong women to center herself in the story. Mrs. Harrison, the wife of Dad's senior partner, leaned closer to examine the necklace. "The craftsmanship is exquisite, dear. You're so fortunate to have such beautiful family pieces." I'd heard enough. I walked directly into their circle, my heels clicking against the marble floor with more confidence than I felt. "Cheryl? Dad." Dad looked up from his conversation with William Harrison himself, and I could see the immediate annoyance flash across his face. "Victoria, what are you doing here? This is invitation only." I kept my voice level professional, the same tone I used with difficult clients at the gallery. "I need to speak with you privately. It's about the necklace Cheryl is wearing." Cheryl's smile brightened, but something calculated flickered behind her eyes. "Oh, Victoria, isn't this piece absolutely gorgeous? Your father said you wouldn't mind me borrowing it for tonight. It looks so much better on me anyway, don't you think? The emerald matches my dress perfectly." The casual cruelty of that comment, the suggestion that family heirlooms were just accessories to be matched with outfits, made my hands clench into fists. I forced myself to breathe before responding. "That necklace is worth $2.3 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to pause. Mrs. Harrison's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. 2 other wives in the circle actually took a step backward, as if proximity to this much drama might somehow contaminate them. Dad laughed, but it was nervous and forced. "Victoria, don't be dramatic. It's obviously costume jewelry. Very pretty costume jewelry, but come on. $2 million? That's ridiculous." I pulled out my phone and opened the insurance appraisal Marcus had emailed me after our session. The photos were crystal clear, professional documentation that left no room for doubt. I held the screen toward Dad, watching his face go pale as he read the official assessment. Current replacement value, $300,000. Provenance documented through 5 generations. Colombian emerald, approximately 8.2 carats, surrounded by 3.1 carats of old European cut diamonds, handcrafted white gold setting circa 1870. Other guests had started to notice the commotion. I could feel eyes turning toward us, conversations quieting as people sensed drama unfolding. This was exactly what I'd hoped to avoid, but Cheryl's public performance had forced my hand. Cheryl maintained her composure, but I noticed her hand move unconsciously to touch the necklace in a protective gesture. There must be some mistake. This is clearly a reproduction. I know quality jewelry when I see it, and while this is beautifully made, it's obviously not authentic. The setting work alone would be worth more than that if it were real. Her confidence was impressive, I had to admit. If I hadn't known the truth, hadn't grown up with stories about great-great-grandmother Eleanor, hadn't watched my mother wear this same necklace to every important moment in her life, I might have been swayed by Cheryl's certainty. But I did know the truth, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite my family's history. Mrs. Harrison cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we should let you all discuss this privately. She began steering the other wives away from our little scene, but I could see them whispering furiously as they moved toward the bar. Dad grabbed my arm, his grip tighter than necessary. Not here, Victoria. Whatever this is about, we're not doing this here. Actually, Dad, we are doing this here. Because that necklace needs to come off Cheryl's neck right now, and it needs to go back into proper security before something happens to it. Cheryl's mask slipped just slightly. Something like, what exactly? Are you suggesting I would damage it somehow? Tyler, I'm insulted that your daughter would imply I'm not trustworthy with family jewelry. The way she said family jewelry made my skin crawl. She'd been wearing it for less than 3 hours and was already talking about it like it belonged to her. I'm not implying anything, Cheryl. I'm stating facts. That necklace has been in my family for 5 generations. It's never left family custody, never been worn by anyone outside our bloodline, and it certainly has never been borrowed for social events. Dad's face was red now, embarrassment and anger warring for control. Victoria, you're being completely unreasonable, even if it is valuable, which I still find hard to believe Cheryl didn't know. She was trying to do something nice to look beautiful for an important evening. You're making her feel terrible over an honest mistake. An honest mistake. That's what he called taking a multi-million-dollar family heirloom without permission to impress people at a party. Dad, can I please speak with you alone for just 1 minute? He looked around the ballroom, clearly calculating the damage this scene was already doing to his reputation. Fine. 1 minute. But Victoria, you need to apologize to Cheryl for embarrassing her like this. I followed him to a quieter alcove near the ballroom entrance, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. When we were out of earshot of the other guests, I turned to face him directly. Dad, this isn't just about the necklace being valuable. It's about the fact that you went into my bedroom, took something from my private jewelry collection without asking, and gave it to someone else to wear. Even if it had been costume jewelry, that's not okay. His defensive posture softened slightly. I wasn't snooping around, sweetheart. I was picking up those tax documents from your office, and I saw the jewelry box sitting open on your dresser. Cheryl had mentioned wanting something special to wear tonight, and the necklace was so pretty I thought it would make her happy. I was trying to be thoughtful. By taking my belongings without permission, I thought you'd be glad to help. Cheryl makes me happy, Victoria, and I thought you'd want to support that. After everything I went through when your mother died, after how lost I was, I thought you'd be grateful that I found someone who brings joy back into my life. The emotional manipulation was so smooth I almost missed it. Almost. But I'd learned to recognize these patterns over the past 3 years, the way conversations with Dad always seemed to circle back to his needs, his happiness, his recovery from grief. Dad, I do want you to be happy, but taking my things without asking isn't about making you happy, and lending out a family heirloom that's been entrusted to my care isn't about supporting your relationship. I took a deep breath, preparing to tell him something I'd been investigating for months, something I'd hoped I'd never have to reveal. There's something else you need to know about Cheryl, something I discovered when I started noticing that small things were going missing from Mom's collection. Dad's face went completely still. What do you mean, things going missing? I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder I'd been carrying for months, hoping I'd never have to use it. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a private investigator's report that had cost me $8,000 and 3 sleepless nights. 4 months ago, I started noticing that small items were disappearing from the house. Mom's silver picture frame from the living room mantel, the antique letter opener from her desk, Grandma Eleanor's pearl brooch that used to sit in the display case in the hallway. Dad frowned, his lawyer instincts kicking in despite his obvious discomfort. Those things could have been misplaced during the move when Cheryl moved in. You know how chaotic that was, boxes everywhere, things getting mixed up. I opened the folder and handed him the first photograph. This is Mom's silver picture frame, the one with your wedding photo that sat on the mantel for 23 years. Do you remember when it disappeared? He stared at the image, and I could see recognition dawning in his eyes. Cheryl said she'd taken it to be polished. That was back in March. She said the silver had gotten tarnished and she wanted to surprise me by having it professionally cleaned. I handed him a receipt. This is from Golden State Pawn on Spring Street in downtown LA. Item description, silver picture frame, Tiffany & Company, circa 1999. Date sold March 18, 2024. Amount received $450. The color drained from Dad's face. That can't be right. Cheryl said it was at the jewelry shop getting polished. She said it would be ready in a few weeks. It's been 8 months, Dad. When was the last time you asked about it? I could see him thinking, trying to remember and failing. The truth was, he'd been so caught up in his new marriage, so grateful to have someone filling the empty spaces in the house, that he hadn't really noticed what was disappearing. I handed him another receipt. The antique letter opener, sold the same day, and another one, Grandma Eleanor's pearl brooch, sold a week later. Dad sank into one of the upholstered chairs in the alcove, the papers trembling in his hands. But why would she do this? We have plenty of money. I give her whatever she wants. There's no reason for her to sell family things. That's when I showed him the most devastating piece of evidence, a copy of a marriage license from Clark County, Nevada, dated June 15, 2019. The bride's name was Charlotte Elizabeth Meyer. The groom was Robert Patterson, age 62, widowed retired investment banker from Scottsdale, Arizona. Dad stared at the document for a long time before speaking. This isn't Cheryl. This is some other person with a similar name. I handed him another document. Divorce decree dated October 3, 2020. Irreconcilable differences. And a police report filed by Robert Patterson in November 2020 reporting the theft of several valuable items from his home, including his deceased wife's diamond tennis bracelet and a collection of rare coins worth approximately $30,000. The suspect was described as Charlotte Meyer, also known as Cheryl Martinez, also known as Sharon Collins. 5 foot 6 inches tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, 44 years old. Last known address, a post office box in Las Vegas, Nevada. Dad's hands were shaking now. This can't be the same person. My Cheryl is from Orange County. She was Miss Orange County in 1999. She showed me the photos, the crown, everything. I pulled out my phone and showed him the private investigator's report. There was no Miss Orange County named Cheryl Martinez in 1999. There was no record of anyone by that name in the Orange County beauty pageant system at all. The photos she showed you were purchased from a stock photography website. The crown was a replica bought on eBay. Everything she told you about her background was a lie, Dad. Her real name is Charlotte Meyer, and she makes a living targeting wealthy widowers. You're the 3rd man she's married in the past 6 years. Dad stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the hotel's famous gardens. The party continued inside the ballroom, the sound of laughter and conversation, a sharp contrast to the devastation unfolding in our little alcove. How long have you known about this? I hired the investigator in February after I started noticing things disappearing, but I didn't get the full report until last month. I kept hoping I was wrong, that there was some other explanation. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, Dad. Remember when I asked you about Cheryl's background, when I suggested maybe you should slow things down, get to know each other better before moving in together? You said I was being overprotective, that I needed to trust your judgment and support your happiness. He turned back to face me, and for the first time in 3 years I saw my father instead of the grateful, smitten man Cheryl had turned him into. But if everything you're saying is true, Then what does she want from me? The other men had money investments, things worth stealing. I'm comfortable, but I'm not wealthy like that. Dad, you own a 4-bedroom house in Pasadena that's worth $2.8 million. You have a partnership share in one of LA's most prestigious law firms. Your retirement accounts are worth over $1 million, and you have access to Mom's family heirlooms, things that Cheryl would know are valuable if she did any research at all. Plus, you were vulnerable. You'd been alone for 2 years, you were still grieving, and you were grateful for any attention. You were the perfect mark. The word mark hung in the air between us, harsh and clinical. Dad winced as if I'd slapped him. There's something else, Dad. Something more recent. I showed him the final document in the folder. A pawn shop receipt dated just 6 weeks earlier. The item description made him sit down hard in the chair. Gold wedding band, ladies 14 karat, with inscription, "Forever my Rebecca, 8-15-98. Mom's wedding ring, the one you told me Cheryl lost at the gym." Dad's voice was barely a whisper. She said her gym bag was stolen. She was so upset, crying about how sorry she was, how she knew how much that ring meant to me. She sold it for $800, Dad, on the same day she told you it was stolen. He buried his face in his hands, and I could see his whole world reshaping itself around this new reality. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of believing he'd found love again, 3 years of defending Cheryl against his own family's concerns, all crumbling in the space of a few minutes. From inside the ballroom, I could hear the sound of the auction beginning, the auctioneer's smooth voice, encouraging bids for charity items. Somewhere in that crowd, Cheryl was still wearing my family's most precious heirloom, probably charming more lawyers' wives with lies about our family history. Dad, we need to get the necklace back. Tonight, before she realizes we know who she really is. He looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his eyes since before Mom died. Determination. The fierce protectiveness that had made him a formidable lawyer and a devoted father, buried for 3 years under grief and loneliness and Cheryl's careful manipulations. How do we do this without destroying my career? If this becomes a public scene, if the partners find out I've been living with a con artist who's been stealing from my family, I'll never make senior partner. Hell, they might push me out entirely. I thought about the emerald necklace, about 5 generations of women who had protected it through wars and depressions and family crises. I thought about my mother's final words about guarding our legacy from people who didn't understand its value. Dad, your career isn't more important than our family's heritage, but we can try to handle this quietly if we act fast. We walked back toward the ballroom, but as we reached the entrance, I realized the space where we'd left Cheryl was empty. The wives she'd been charming were still clustered near the silent auction, but Cheryl herself was nowhere to be seen. My heart started racing as I scanned the crowd, looking for that distinctive black dress and the unmistakable fire of the emerald necklace under the chandeliers. Dad? Where is she? We split up to search the ballroom, Dad heading toward the bar while I checked the ladies' lounge and the terrace overlooking the hotel gardens. The charity auction was in full swing, with couples bidding enthusiastically on vacation packages and art pieces, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. I found Mrs. Harrison near the dessert station and approached her as casually as I could manage. "Excuse me, have you seen Cheryl?" The woman in the black dress with the emerald necklace. Mrs. Harrison's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone who'd witnessed enough family drama at these events to know when to stay out of it. "She left about 10 minutes ago, dear. Said she wasn't feeling well and needed to get some air. I assumed she and your father had worked things out." My stomach dropped. I thanked Mrs. Harrison and immediately called Dad's cell phone. He answered on the first ring. "She's gone. Mrs. Harrison saw her leave 10 minutes ago. I'm at the valet stand now. Let me check with them." I could hear him talking to someone in the background, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in court. After a moment, he came back on the line. "The valet confirms it. A woman in a black dress and emerald necklace left in a white Porsche Cayenne about 15 minutes ago. She seemed to be in quite a hurry." We met at the hotel's main entrance, both of us breathing hard from rushing through the crowded ballroom. Dad's face was pale, and I could see the reality of the situation hitting him in waves. She knew, Dad. Somehow she figured out that we were on to her. But how? We were careful. Our conversation was private. I thought back to the scene in the ballroom, trying to remember exactly what had happened. Then it hit me. When I'd shown him this insurance documentation on my phone, other people had seen it too. Mrs. Harrison, the other wives, even some of the men who'd been standing nearby during the auction preview. Word travels fast at these events. Someone probably mentioned to her that we were having an intense conversation about a $2 million necklace. She put two and two together and realized her cover was blown. Dad pulled out his phone and called Cheryl directly. I could hear it ringing through the speaker, but there was no answer. He tried again with the same result. She's not going to answer, Dad. She's probably already planning her escape route. I had an idea. Do you have Find My iPhone set up with her? Dad nodded, his fingers trembling slightly as he navigated to the app. When the map loaded, we could see a moving dot heading north on the 405 freeway, traveling fast. She's not going home to Pasadena. She's heading toward Burbank. Burbank Airport, I realized. Much smaller than LAX, fewer security cameras, easier to disappear from, and there were regular flights to Las Vegas, Phoenix, all the places where Charlotte Meyer had operated before. We have to follow her. Dad, we can't let her leave California with that necklace. Victoria, even if we catch up to her, what are we going to do? Create a scene at the airport. Have her arrested. This is going to be a disaster, no matter how we handle it. I thought about my mother's words about the responsibility I'd accepted when I'd promised to protect our family's legacy. Then I thought about Charlotte Meyer's previous victims, the other widowed men she'd manipulated and stolen from. Dad, she's not just a thief. She's a predator who targets grieving people at their most vulnerable moments. You weren't her first victim, and if we let her go, you won't be her last. We got into Dad's BMW and started following the moving dot on his phone screen. The Saturday evening traffic was lighter than usual, and we were able to make good time heading north on the 405. As we drove, Dad finally started talking about things he'd been too embarrassed or too defensive to admit before. I should have listened to your concerns about her. I should have listened to Eleanor when she said something felt wrong about Cheryl's stories. But I was so grateful to feel needed again, to have someone who seemed to think I was interesting and attractive and worth loving. After your mother died, I felt like I'd become invisible, like I was just marking time until I could retire and fade away completely. Cheryl made me feel alive again, like I had value beyond just being someone's widowed father. I understood that pain more than he knew. After Mom died, I'd thrown myself into work at the gallery building, something that would make her proud, but also trying to fill the enormous hole her absence had left in our family. The difference was I'd chosen to honor her memory by preserving what she'd valued. Dad had chosen to try to replace what he'd lost. But Dad, you do have value. You're a brilliant lawyer, a loving father, a good man who deserves genuine love, not manipulation. Cheryl didn't fall in love with you. She studied you, figured out what you needed to hear, and gave you a performance designed to make you vulnerable. The dot on the phone showed that Cheryl had exited the freeway and was now moving through the streets near Burbank Airport. We were still about 10 minutes behind her, but we were gaining ground. What if she's not actually going to the airport? Dad asked. What if she's just trying to throw us off? Then we'll have wasted an evening, but at least we'll know the truth about who she really is. But Dad, if she does get on a plane with that necklace, we'll never see it again. It'll end up sold to some private collector, and 5 generations of family history will disappear forever. We pulled into the Burbank Airport parking structure just as the Find My iPhone app showed Cheryl's location becoming stationary. Dad's hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. There. I pointed to a white Porsche Cayenne parked in the short-term section, clearly abandoned in a hurry. The driver's door wasn't even fully closed. We parked and ran toward the terminal building. Inside, the Saturday night crowd was typical for Burbank. Families heading to weekend getaways, business travelers trying to get home, couples going to Vegas for quick wedding ceremonies. The kind of crowd where someone in an expensive dress might blend in, especially if they were trying to avoid attention. I spotted her first, standing at the Southwest Airlines counter, talking animatedly with a gate agent. Even from a distance, I could see the emerald necklace glinting under the terminal's fluorescent lights. She'd thrown a light jacket over her shoulders, probably trying to partially conceal the jewelry, but the emerald was too distinctive to hide completely. Dad saw her too and started walking in her direction, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, let me call airport security first. If she sees us coming, she might run and then we'll never catch her. But as I was dialing airport security on my phone, Cheryl turned around and saw us standing there. For just a moment, our eyes met across the crowded terminal, and I saw the exact instant when she realized her escape plan had failed. What happened next was something I'd replay in my mind for months afterward. Instead of running or trying to hide, Cheryl straightened her shoulders, touched the emerald necklace one last time, and walked directly toward us with the confident stride of someone who'd been planning for this moment all along. Cheryl approached us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, still playing the role of the loving wife, even though we all knew the performance was over. "Tyler, sweetheart, what are you doing here? And Victoria, how lovely to see you again. I wasn't feeling well at the gala, so I thought I'd head home early and let you boys enjoy your evening." Dad's voice was quiet but steady. "Where were you planning to fly tonight, Cheryl?" Her laugh was too bright, too casual. "Fly. Oh, I wasn't flying anywhere. I just came here to pick up my friend Michelle. She was coming back from Phoenix and needed a ride. But her flight was delayed, so I was just waiting." I had already finished dialing airport security, and I could hear the phone connecting. "Yes, I need to report stolen jewelry valued at over $2 million. The suspect is currently at the Southwest Airlines ticket counter in the main terminal." Cheryl's mask finally slipped. Her cheerful expression transformed into something cold and calculating, and for the first time I was seeing the real woman who had been living in my father's house for 3 years. "You're making a terrible mistake, Victoria. That necklace was given to me by my husband. It's a gift between spouses, which makes it legally mine under California community property law." Dad stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years practicing law. "Cheryl, community property doesn't apply to family heirlooms that predate the marriage, and it certainly doesn't apply when the item was taken without the owner's permission." Airport Police Officer Martinez appeared with impressive speed, a middle-aged man with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked at our little group and immediately assessed the situation. "I understand there's a report of stolen jewelry. Can someone explain what's happening here?" I showed him the insurance documentation on my phone, while Dad provided a brief explanation of how Cheryl had taken the necklace from my house. Officer Martinez examined the photos and appraisal documents with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with valuable stolen items before. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez addressed Cheryl, "I need to see some identification, and I'd like to ask you about this necklace you're wearing." Cheryl's composure was cracking, but she was still fighting. "This is harassment. My husband gave me this jewelry, and his daughter is just jealous because Tyler has found happiness after her mother's death. This is a family dispute that has no business involving the police. Actually, ma'am, theft of property valued over $2 million is a felony regardless of family relationships." Officer Martinez turned to me. "Can you provide additional documentation proving ownership?" I handed him the folder I'd been carrying since the gala. 5 generations of ownership records, insurance appraisals, photographs, and the detailed provenance documentation that Marcus had helped me compile. Officer Martinez reviewed each document carefully. "This is very thorough documentation. And you're saying this item was taken from your residence without your permission?" "Yes. My father used his emergency key to enter my house and took the necklace from my bedroom thinking it was costume jewelry. He didn't realize its value or significance." Officer Martinez looked at Dad. "Sir, is that accurate?" Dad's voice was heavy with regret. "Yes, officer. I made a terrible mistake. I thought it was just pretty costume jewelry, and I wanted my wife to have something special to wear. I had no idea of its true value or that taking it would cause this situation. But it was here that Cheryl made the mistake that unraveled everything. Instead of continuing to maintain her innocence, instead of sticking to the story about spousal gifts and family disputes, she panicked. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. Tyler, you know I would never steal from you or your family. But I can't miss this flight. I have important business in Phoenix and I need to leave tonight." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said you were here to pick up a friend whose flight was delayed." Cheryl's face went red. I have business there and I was going to pick up Michelle on the way back. It's complicated." That's when Dad pulled out his phone and showed Officer Martinez the private investigator's report. Officer, my daughter hired a PI because she suspected my wife of stealing family items. What they discovered is that my wife's real name is Charlotte Elizabeth Meyer, and she has outstanding warrants in Arizona and Nevada for similar theft charges. Officer Martinez read through the report, his expression growing more serious with each page. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning, and I'm going to have to secure that necklace as evidence. No. Cheryl's voice rose to a near shout, causing other travelers to turn and stare. You can't take this from me. Do you have any idea how much money this is worth? This is my retirement plan. This is my security. The words hung in the air, a confession more damning than anything in the private investigator's report. She'd just admitted that she saw the necklace as a commodity, as money, rather than as the family heirloom it actually was. Ma'am, you're under arrest for theft of property valued over $2 million, attempted interstate transportation of stolen goods, and fraud. Officer Martinez was already reaching for his handcuffs when Detective James Rodriguez arrived. Detective Rodriguez was a tall, serious man who introduced himself as a specialist in art and jewelry theft. Officer Martinez filled him in quickly, while Cheryl stood between them, finally understanding that her carefully constructed life was collapsing around her. Ms. Meyer, Detective Rodriguez said, addressing her by her real name, we've been tracking your activities across multiple states. This arrest gives us the evidence we need to build a comprehensive federal case. Under pressure with nowhere left to run and no more stories to tell, Cheryl finally told the truth. Okay, fine. Yes, I'm Charlotte Meyer, and yes, I was going to Phoenix to meet Michael Rodriguez, who is not related to the detective here. He's my boyfriend, and we've been working together for the past 5 years, targeting wealthy widowers. Tyler was supposed to be an easy mark, but he didn't have as much liquid cash as we expected, so we had to get creative. Dad looked like he'd been physically struck. Everything was a lie. Everything. Not everything, Tyler. I do care about you. You're a sweet man, and in another life I might have actually fallen for you. But business is business, and Michael and I have a good thing going. We research recently widowed men through obituaries and social media, figure out their vulnerabilities, and give them exactly what they need to hear. Detective Rodriguez was taking notes as she spoke. How many men have you and your partner targeted? Cheryl shrugged as if discussing the weather. Tyler makes 7 in the past 5 years. Usually we take smaller items over time, things that won't be missed right away. But when Victoria started getting suspicious, we decided to go for the big score and disappear. The necklace was carefully removed from around her neck and sealed in an evidence bag. Watching 5 generations of family history being treated as evidence in a criminal case was heartbreaking, but I knew it was necessary. As the police led Cheryl away in handcuffs, she turned back to Dad one last time. Tyler, I really am sorry it ended this way. You deserved better than what I gave you. And for the first time in 3 years, I agreed with something she said. The drive back to Pasadena was silent for the first 20 minutes. Dad stared out the passenger window at the city lights blurring past, while I focused on the road and tried to process everything that had happened. The elegant evening gown I'd chosen for a quiet Saturday at the gallery felt ridiculous now, like a costume from someone else's life. When we finally reached the house, Dad walked straight to the living room bar and poured himself 3 fingers of the Macallan that Mom had given him for their 20th wedding anniversary. He'd been saving it for special occasions, but I suppose discovering your wife of 3 years was a professional con artist qualified as memorable enough. I want to know everything, Victoria. About your work, your life, your dreams. I realize I don't actually know who you've become since your mother died, and that's inexcusable for a father. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat across from him in Mom's favorite reading chair. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken a criminal investigation and a near disaster to get my father's full attention for the first time in years. Where do you want me to start? Start with the gallery. I know you inherited it from your mother, but I never asked what you've done with it, how you've grown it, what your goals are. I've been a terrible father, haven't I? The gallery generates about $850,000 in annual revenue now. We specialize in museum acquisitions and private collector services. I've built relationships with institutions throughout California and the Southwest. The deal I'm negotiating Monday with the LA County Museum would establish us as one of the major players in West Coast art acquisition. Dad's eyebrows rose. 850,000, Victoria, that's incredibly successful. How did you build that from what was essentially your mother's hobby business? It wasn't a hobby business, Dad. Mom had a master's degree in art history from UCLA and 15 years of experience in museum curation before she opened the gallery. She had serious professional credentials and important industry connections. I just expanded on the foundation she'd already built. I could see him processing this information, recalibrating his understanding of both Mom's career and my own capabilities. What about the inheritance? I know your mother left you some money, but I assumed it was modest, maybe enough to cover college loans and help with a down payment on a house someday. I inherited $12 million, Dad. The gallery, the art collection, real estate holdings, and trust funds that had been building for decades. Mom's family had money going back to the California land boom, and she was careful about growing and protecting it. Dad set down his whiskey glass hard enough to make a sharp sound against the glass table. $12 million, Victoria. Why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked. And because for the past 6 years you've been so lost in your own grief, and then so infatuated with Cheryl that you stopped seeing me as anything more than your dead wife's daughter who needed to be checked on occasionally. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. Dad had been physically present in my life, but emotionally absent in ways that had forced me to navigate major life decisions completely alone. You're right. Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. After your mother died, I couldn't stand being in this house, seeing her things, remembering all our plans that would never happen. When I was with you, all I could see was her eyes looking back at me, and it hurt too much to bear. So when Cheryl came along and made me feel like someone other than Rebecca's grieving widower, I grabbed onto that feeling like a lifeline. I let myself believe that moving forward meant moving away from everything that reminded me of the life I'd lost. I understood that pain better than he knew. After Mom died, I'd thrown myself into expanding the gallery, partly because it felt like honoring her memory, but also because staying busy meant I didn't have to sit with the enormous emptiness her absence had created. But Dad, moving forward doesn't mean abandoning the people who love you. It doesn't mean ignoring the family you still have in favor of someone who's telling you what you want to hear. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed Eleanor's number, and I realized I'd never called to tell her what had happened. Grandma Eleanor's voice was sharp with worry. Victoria. Dear, I've been trying to reach your father all evening. Is everything all right? I had the strangest feeling something was wrong. I put the phone on speaker so Dad could hear. Grandma, we're both here. We have a lot to tell you, but the most important thing is that Cheryl is gone and the emerald necklace is safe. There was a long pause before Eleanor responded. Thank goodness. I've been having nightmares about that woman getting her hands on family heirlooms. What happened? Dad took the phone and gave Eleanor a brief explanation of the evening's events. I watched his face as he talked, seeing him process the reality of his situation as he described it to his former mother-in-law. Tyler Matthews. Eleanor's voice carried the authority of someone who'd survived 78 years without suffering fools gladly. You are a brilliant man who made some very foolish choices. But you're also Rebecca's husband and Victoria's father, which means your family, and family protects family. I know, Eleanor. I failed at that responsibility, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making it right. Good. Because I'm selling the house in Santa Barbara and moving to that lovely assisted living community near Victoria's gallery. Someone needs to keep an eye on both of you, and I have stories about our family history that need to be properly documented before I'm too old to remember them clearly. After we hung up with Eleanor, Dad, and I sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the house felt different, somehow lighter, as if the truth had cleared away years of accumulated misunderstandings and neglect. Victoria. I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you think I can come back from this? Do you think we can rebuild our relationship? Or have I damaged things too badly? I looked at my father, really looked at him for the first time in years. He was 57 years old, still handsome, despite the lines that grief and stress had etched around his eyes. He was a good man who'd made terrible choices while trying to escape unbearable pain. Dad, 3 hours ago, you were ready to defend Cheryl's right to wear a stolen necklace because you thought it would make her happy. But when you learned the truth, you chose our family over your own comfort. You chose to face the humiliation and professional consequences rather than let her escape with Mom's legacy. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are underneath all the hurt and confusion. He smiled for the first time since I'd arrived at the gala, a real smile that reminded me of the father I'd had before grief had made him a stranger. There's something else I need to tell you. About my job, about the partnership, about what this scandal is likely to cost me professionally. But before he could continue, his phone rang. The caller ID showed William Harrison's number, and Dad's face went pale. The senior partner at Dad's law firm calling at 11:30 on a Saturday night. This couldn't be good news. Dad answered on the third ring, his voice carefully controlled. "Hello, Bill. I imagine you've heard about tonight's events by now." I could hear William Harrison's voice through the phone speaker, and his tone was not the sympathetic one of a concerned friend. It was the careful, measured voice of a senior partner protecting his firm's interests. "Tyler, I've spent the last 2 hours fielding phone calls from partners who attended the gala tonight. The story that's making the rounds is that your wife was arrested for stealing a multi-million-dollar necklace from your daughter. Is that accurate?" Dad's shoulders sagged as he realized that the professional consequences he'd feared were already beginning. "Yes, Bill, that's essentially accurate, though the situation is more complex than it sounds. I'm sure it is, Tyler. But perception is reality in our business, and the perception right now is that Morrison and Associates has a partner whose judgment is so compromised that he married a con artist without doing basic due diligence. Do you understand how that reflects on the firm?" I watched Dad's face as he processed what was really being said. This wasn't a supportive phone call from a concerned colleague. This was damage control, and Dad was being positioned as the damage that needed to be controlled. "Bill, I understand your concerns about the firm's reputation. What do you need from me to minimize any negative impact? We need you to take an immediate leave of absence while we assess the situation." The partnership committee was scheduled to meet next Friday to vote on this year's senior partner promotions, but obviously that conversation is going to be postponed indefinitely as far as you're concerned. I could see the defeat in Dad's eyes. 30 years of building his career, 30 years of late nights and weekend client meetings, and careful relationship building, all potentially destroyed by 3 years of loneliness and poor judgment. "How long of a leave are we talking about, Bill?" That depends on several factors, whether there are criminal charges filed against you personally, whether the media picks up the story, whether any of our clients express concerns about having their legal matters handled by someone involved in a high-profile theft case. "Dad," I interrupted, putting my hand on his arm. "Ask him if you're being fired, or if this is actually a leave of absence." Dad looked at me gratefully and repeated my question. "Bill, I need to know if you're terminating my partnership or if this is truly a temporary leave situation." There was a long pause before Harrison answered. "Tyler, I think you know the answer to that question. The partnership agreement allows for removal of partners whose conduct brings discredit to the firm. We're trying to handle this as gracefully as possible, but your position with Morrison and Associates is no longer sustainable. So I'm fired. You're being asked to resign your partnership in lieu of formal termination proceedings. It's a better outcome for everyone involved, including you." After Dad hung up the phone, he sat in silence for several minutes. I wanted to say something comforting, but I also knew he needed time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 30 years, Victoria. 30 years of my life building something, and it's gone in one evening. "I'm sorry, Dad. This is my fault. If I hadn't insisted on confronting Cheryl publicly, if I'd handled this differently." "No." Dad's voice was firm. "This is the consequence of my choices, not yours. You were protecting our family's legacy, and I was the one who put it at risk in the first place." He stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Mom's garden, where her roses were still blooming despite the October chill. "You know what's strange? I thought losing my partnership would feel like the end of the world. But sitting here now, thinking about what really matters, I feel something I haven't felt in years." "What's that relief?" "For the first time since your mother died, I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't have to perform happiness with a woman who was using me. I don't have to smile through partners' meetings and pretend I care about billable hours and client development. 2 weeks later, Detective Rodriguez called with an update on Cheryl's case. Charlotte Meyer was facing federal charges in 4 states with a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years. Her cooperation with authorities had revealed a network of similar scams targeting vulnerable widowers throughout the Southwest. Your father's stolen items have been recovered from various pawn shops and private buyers, Detective Rodriguez explained. We found Rebecca's wedding ring, the silver picture frame, and several other pieces. They'll be returned to you after the trial proceedings are complete. The necklace itself would remain in evidence for at least 6 months, but knowing it was safe and would eventually be returned was enough for now. Dad decided not to look for another law firm position. Instead, he used his savings and Rebecca's life insurance policy to take extended time off focusing on family and considering what he actually wanted to do with the rest of his life. Eleanor made good on her promise to move closer, selling her Santa Barbara house and relocating to a beautiful assisted living community just 10 minutes from my gallery. Her presence brought stability and continuity that both Dad and I desperately needed. She also brought 5 generations of family documents, photograph albums, and stories that had never been properly recorded. Marcus Chen helped us create a comprehensive archive, photographing and documenting every family heirloom with complete provenance information. As I watched Marcus work with Eleanor's collection, carefully cataloging pieces that told the story of our family's journey from gold rush pioneers to modern California, I realized this documentation project could become something much larger. What if we created a legitimate museum exhibition about California pioneer women? Eleanor's stories combined with the physical artifacts and historical documentation could become a scholarly contribution to understanding women's roles in Western expansion. The idea excited me in a way that pure art dealing never had. This would be personal and professional, combining my business expertise with our family history in a way that honored both Mom's academic background and Eleanor's storytelling traditions. Dad began attending family therapy sessions with Dr. Sarah Kim, a grief counselor who'd helped me immediately after Mom's death. Dr. Kim specialized in helping people process complex loss, and she was particularly skilled at addressing the guilt Dad carried about finding happiness after Rebecca's death. One evening after Dad's therapy session, he came to the gallery where I was working late on acquisition paperwork. Dr. Kim helped me understand something today. I wasn't betraying your mother's memory by wanting companionship. I was betraying it by settling for someone who didn't respect the life Rebecca and I had built together. A woman who truly cared about me would have wanted to understand our family history, not profit from it. She would have encouraged my relationship with you instead of subtly undermining it. We started having weekly dinners together, something we hadn't done since before Mom got sick. During those evenings, Dad began asking questions he should have been asking for years. About my work, my goals, my thoughts about art and history and family. For the first time since Mom's death, I felt like I had my father back. But the most surprising development was Dad's growing interest in elder law, specifically in helping families protect their assets from the kind of predatory behavior Charlotte Meyer represented. I keep thinking about her other victims, Victoria. Men like me who were vulnerable and trusting and got taken advantage of by someone who studied their weaknesses. There has to be a way to help people protect themselves and their families from these scams. It was the first time in months I'd seen real passion in Dad's voice, the kind of energy that had made him such a successful lawyer before grief and Cheryl had dulled his enthusiasm for everything. Maybe losing Morrison and Associates wasn't the end of Dad's career. Maybe it was the beginning of something more meaningful. 6 months after Charlotte Meyer's arrest, Dad was sitting in my gallery office reviewing contracts for the museum exhibition that had grown far beyond anything I'd originally imagined. Pioneer Women of California. 5 generations of strength had attracted interest from institutions throughout the state, and we were fielding requests for a traveling version that could visit smaller museums and historical societies. Your legal expertise is invaluable for these licensing agreements, I told him, as he redlined a particularly complex clause about insurance liability. The museums want to display some of Eleanor's original artifacts, but the risk management requirements are incredibly detailed. Dad looked up from the contracts with the kind of focused energy I hadn't seen since before Mom's illness. This is fascinating work, Victoria. I'm learning more about art law and cultural heritage protection than I ever imagined existed. It's making me think there might be a whole practice area here that's underserved. That was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. Dad had been exploring the idea of starting his own practice focused on elder law and asset protection, with a specialty in helping families safeguard cultural and artistic heritage. His experience with Charlotte Meyer had given him insights into predatory behavior that most lawyers never developed. Maggie Chen knocked on the office door carrying a stack of photographs that had just arrived from our professional documentation session. The partnership between Maggie and me had evolved naturally over the months of crisis and recovery. Her steady presence and business acumen had been essential during the most chaotic periods, and we'd recently formalized our working relationship. These came back from the photographer today. Eleanor's interview session turned out beautifully. The photographs showed Eleanor in the gallery's main exhibition space, surrounded by artifacts that told her family's story. At 79, she was still sharp and articulate, and her stories about great-great-grandmother Eleanor Whitmore had provided historical context that even I hadn't fully understood. She's agreed to do the opening reception presentation in person, which is incredible at her age. Most museum curators would kill for a living primary source who can speak about 1870s California with this kind of personal connection. Dad smiled as he looked through the images. Your grandmother has been happier these past 6 months than I've seen her since before your mother got sick. Having a project that honors family history while contributing to academic scholarship gives her real purpose. Eleanor's move to Pasadena had been one of the best decisions any of us had made. Her presence in the assisted living community near the gallery meant she could be involved in the exhibition development while maintaining her independence. More importantly, her stories and insights had helped both Dad and me understand our family legacy in ways that went beyond material objects. The emerald necklace had been returned to us 3 weeks earlier after Charlotte Meyer's guilty plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial. Holding it again, feeling the weight of 150 years of family history in my hands, had been unexpectedly emotional. But what surprised me was that I no longer felt the same protective anxiety about it. Working on the exhibition, understanding how our family's story fit into the larger narrative of California history, had helped me see the necklace as part of something bigger than just our personal legacy. Dad's phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Linda Patterson, and I smiled as I watched Dad's expression soften. His relationship with Linda was progressing slowly and carefully, built on the foundation of everything he'd learned from the disaster with Charlotte Meyer. Linda was a fellow attorney who specialized in family law, and she'd met Dad at a continuing education seminar on protecting vulnerable adults from financial abuse. Their relationship had developed over shared professional interests and mutual respect, rather than desperate loneliness and manipulation. Hi, Linda. Yes, I'm still at the gallery with Victoria. The contract review is taking longer than expected, but we're making good progress. I could hear Linda's warm laugh through the phone speaker. Tell Victoria I said hello and remind her that she promised to show me the exhibition space next week when I'm downtown for depositions. Dad covered the phone and looked at me. Linda wants to see the exhibition setup, and she's bringing her mother, who's a retired art history professor from USC. Apparently, her mother is very excited about the California pioneer women angle. That's perfect. The more academic credibility we can build, the better. I'm hoping this exhibition will establish the gallery's reputation for serious historical scholarship, not just commercial art dealing. After Dad finished his call with Linda, we worked together for another hour on the contract details. It was peaceful, productive work, the kind of father-daughter collaboration I'd never thought we'd achieve. You know, Victoria, 6 months ago I thought losing my partnership at Morrison & Associates was the worst thing that could happen to me professionally. But sitting here now working on something that combines legal expertise with family history and cultural preservation, I realize I was stuck in a career that had stopped challenging me years ago. What are you thinking about doing long-term? Dad set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. I want to start a practice focused on helping families protect their legacies from predatory behavior. Not just financial scams, but cultural heritage theft, art fraud, estate manipulation. There's a real need for lawyers who understand both the legal and emotional aspects of family asset protection. The idea made perfect sense. Dad's experience with Charlotte Meyer, combined with his decades of legal expertise and his newfound understanding of cultural heritage, positioned him uniquely to help other families avoid similar disasters. "Would you consider having your practice affiliated with the gallery?" I asked. "Not a merger, but a partnership where we could refer clients to each other and collaborate on cases involving art or cultural artifacts." Dad's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in years. "That's brilliant, Victoria. Families dealing with heritage preservation often need both legal and curatorial expertise. We could provide comprehensive services that most people can't get anywhere else." Maggie looked up from the photographs she'd been reviewing. "That could be a significant business opportunity. There are thousands of California families with pioneer heritage, and many of them probably have artifacts and documents that need proper preservation and protection." We spent the rest of the afternoon brainstorming how a legal and cultural heritage practice might work. Dad's energy and enthusiasm reminded me of the father I'd known before grief had dimmed his passion for everything. As we were preparing to close the gallery for the evening, Marcus Chen arrived with the final insurance appraisal for Eleanor's complete collection. The documentation project had revealed artifacts and documents worth far more than any of us had realized. The total collection is valued at just over $2 million, he reported. But the historical significance is priceless. Some of these documents and photographs are the only surviving records of early women entrepreneurs in Los Angeles County. Dad whistled softly. No wonder Charlotte Meyer was so interested in our family artifacts. She probably researched the genealogy and realized there was significant value beyond just the emerald necklace. That realization led to an important conversation about security and protection. We implemented new safeguards for all family artifacts, proper insurance coverage, and a detailed inventory that would make it impossible for anyone to steal items without detection. But more importantly, we established a family foundation dedicated to preserving and sharing our heritage with future generations. Eleanor would serve as the foundation's historian, Dad would handle legal matters, and I would manage the curatorial and educational aspects. It felt like we'd finally learned the lesson Mom had tried to teach me about family legacy. It wasn't about hoarding precious objects in private collections. It was about understanding, protecting, and sharing the stories that made those objects meaningful. As I locked up the gallery that evening, I reflected on how dramatically our family had changed over the past 6 months. We'd gone from scattered, grieving individuals barely connected to each other to a team working together on something larger than any of us could have accomplished alone. The emerald necklace was secure in the gallery's vault, but it no longer carried the weight of being our family's only tangible connection to the past. We'd built something bigger and more lasting than any single artifact could represent. Dad walked me to my car, a ritual we'd developed over our months of working together. As I was getting ready to drive home, he stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. "Victoria, I want you to know that these past 6 months have been the happiest I've been since your mother died. Not because of the work, though I love what we're building together, but because I finally feel like I know my daughter again, and I'm proud of the woman you've become." It was exactly what I'd been hoping to hear from him for 6 years. 1 year after Charlotte Meyer's arrest, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art was filled with 400 guests celebrating the opening of Pioneer Women of California, the Whitmore Matthews Legacy. The exhibition had exceeded every expectation, drawing visitors from across the country and establishing my gallery as a serious player in historical curation. The emerald necklace was displayed in the exhibition's central case, illuminated by museum-quality lighting that brought out every facet of the Colombian emeralds and old European cut diamonds. But it was no longer just a family heirloom. It had become the centerpiece of a story that connected our personal history to the broader narrative of women's roles in California's development. Eleanor stood at the podium in the museum's main lecture hall, addressing an audience that included museum directors, academic historians, and art collectors from throughout the West Coast. At 80 years old, she commanded attention with the natural authority of someone who had lived through decades of change and retained every detail. The women of my family understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the stories and values passed from one generation to the next. My great-great-grandmother Eleanor Whitmore wore this necklace to suffrage rallies in the 1890s, to business meetings when she took over the family mining interests, and to her children's weddings. Each time she was making a statement about strength, independence, and the responsibility we have to honor those who came before us. I watched from the audience as Eleanor spoke, feeling a deep sense of completion that I hadn't experienced since Mom's death. This exhibition wasn't just about preserving family artifacts. It was about understanding how personal stories connect to larger historical narratives and how protecting cultural heritage serves communities far beyond individual families. Dad was sitting beside me, and I could see tears in his eyes as Eleanor described the family's journey from gold rush pioneers to modern California. His transformation over the past year had been remarkable. The man who had once been so lost in grief that he'd nearly given away our most precious family heirloom was now running a successful practice dedicated to protecting other families from similar disasters. His law firm, Matthews Heritage Protection, specialized in elder abuse prevention and cultural asset security. The combination of his legal expertise and hard-earned understanding of predatory behavior had created a practice unlike anything else in Los Angeles. Clients came to him not just for legal advice, but for the empathy that only comes from personal experience with these devastating scams. After Eleanor's presentation, we moved to the exhibition space for the reception. The displays told our family's story through 5 generations of women, but they also illustrated broader themes about immigration, entrepreneurship, and cultural preservation in the American West. Linda Patterson approached me with her mother, Dr. Patricia Chen, the retired USC art history professor, who had become one of the exhibition's academic advisors. "Victoria, this is extraordinary work." Dr. Chen gestured toward the display case containing documents from great-great-grandmother Eleanor's mining business. "The primary source materials you've preserved provide insights into women's economic activities that most historians never get to access. Have you considered publishing this research?" The idea of turning our family project into academic scholarship was appealing, but I wasn't sure I was ready for that level of scrutiny. "I think the exhibition format works well for now, but maybe in the future we could explore a book or documentary project." Linda smiled and touched Dad's arm affectionately. "Tyler talks about your work every time we have dinner. He's so proud of what you've accomplished, and I think he's found his calling in heritage protection law." Dad's relationship with Linda had progressed steadily over the year, built on mutual respect and shared professional interests rather than desperate loneliness. She understood his history with Charlotte Meyer and appreciated the growth that had come from that painful experience. Marcus Chen joined our conversation carrying a champagne glass and looking pleased with the evening's turnout. "Victoria, I've had 3 museum directors ask about borrowing pieces from your collection for their own exhibitions. The Getty wants to include the necklace in their upcoming show about jewelry as social history." The success was gratifying, but what meant more to me was seeing Dad engaged and passionate about his work again. He was standing near the display about California mining history, explaining to a group of visitors how families could protect important documents and artifacts from both theft and natural disasters. 6 months later, we received news that Charlotte Meyer had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Her cooperation with authorities had led to the arrest of Michael Rodriguez and the recovery of stolen items from at least 15 other victims across 4 states. Detective Rodriguez called to let us know that all of Dad's stolen items had been recovered and returned to their rightful families. Mom's wedding ring, the silver picture frame, and several other pieces were finally back where they belonged. But the most meaningful moment came when Dad returned Mom's wedding ring to me, saying that I should decide when and how to pass it on to the next generation. "Your mother would want it to go to someone who understands what it represents, not just someone who appreciates its monetary value. You'll know the right time and the right person." As I held Mom's ring, feeling the weight of her inscription and Dad's enduring love, I realized that our family's story wasn't really about objects at all. It was about the relationships and values that give those objects meaning. The exhibition continued for 6 months, breaking attendance records and generating requests for a permanent installation. The Matthews Family Foundation, which we'd established to manage our heritage preservation work, began receiving donations from other families who wanted to create similar projects. Dad's law practice was thriving with a waiting list of clients who needed help protecting their assets and their legacies. He'd found a way to turn his personal trauma into professional purpose, helping others avoid the devastation he'd experienced. Eleanor remained sharp and engaged at 81, serving as the Foundation's chief historian and continuing to share stories that connected past and present in ways that enriched everyone who heard them. On the first anniversary of the exhibition opening, I wore the emerald necklace to the closing reception. As I stood in the museum gallery, surrounded by the artifacts and documents that told our family's story, I felt the presence of 5 generations of strong women who had worn this same piece to mark important moments in their lives. I touched the necklace gently and whispered the words that had become my private ritual. "Thank you, Mom. Legacy protected, family restored." The museum's final display panel included a quote from Eleanor that summarized everything we'd learned. The Whitmore emerald necklace represents more than precious stones and fine craftsmanship. It embodies the enduring power of family heritage and the responsibility each generation has to preserve both beauty and history for those who will come after us. Dad stood beside me as visitors filed past the exhibition one final time, and I could see that he finally understood what Mom had tried to teach us both. Family legacies aren't about possessing valuable objects. They're about understanding the stories those objects tell and sharing those stories in ways that honor both the past and the future. As we prepared to pack up the exhibition and return the artifacts to secure storage, I realized that our family's crisis had ultimately strengthened bonds that grief had weakened. We'd learned to protect what mattered most not by hiding it away, but by understanding its true value and sharing that understanding with others. Family stories like ours happen every day in families across the country where precious legacies are threatened by people who see dollar signs instead of history. If you have family heirlooms, important documents, or stories that connect you to previous generations, take the time to protect them properly. Document their history, understand their value, and most importantly, share their significance with the people you love. Because real family treasures aren't just the objects we inherit. They're the love, wisdom, and strength that get passed down through the stories we choose to preserve and share.